By nearly every measure, Native American people in the United States fare worse than the general population. Native Americans have lower life expectancy by 5 years, including higher rates of death from chronic illness like diabetes and heart disease. The rate of suicide in Native American youth is 2.5 times higher than the rest of the country. The rate of violent assault among Native Americans is more than double the rate for the country as a whole. The percentage of Native Americans living in poverty is estimated to be over 26%, 1 in 4, compared to 14.6% for the nation as a whole. Native American communities and history play a monumental role in the history of this country, yet we're just taught some cursory information about battles that happened a few hundred years ago in middle school, and then nothing ever again about this huge population, over 6 million people in the US, and the nations within our nation that they represent. A legal limbo that's made all the more confusing because we never learn about it. So gather around, kids, and let's talk about US Native American relations. It's important because it matters, and no one taught us this shit in school, so let's talk about it now. Roll the intro. Thank you to my partner on today's video, 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏. The weight of the world has been heavy lately, and the topics of my videos have been too, and it's all really important. I don't mean to undercut that at all. But sometimes you need to put down the phone, stop doom scrolling, and take care of yourself. And that includes taking care of your sexual well-being. To help you practice a little sexual self-care, my friends at 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏 and I are literally giving away free vibrators and gift cards for vibrators to everyone who signs up for the giveaway linked in the description below. 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏's mission is to empower everyone to embrace, explore, and celebrate their sexuality, and I am here for it. 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏 is a woman-founded company for all things sexuality, talking sex toys, but also porn, erotica, and even sex ed. I've been following 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏 on Instagram for years because they've got great memes, so I was thrilled to work with them on this, and even more thrilled when they said that this was a giveaway, so I get to give all of you a bunch of free stuff. For example, check out this cute little demi wand. It works well for all body types, very inclusive, we love that. It's compact and discreet, and it comes in this adorable little yellow charging case. It's 100% waterproof and USB rechargeable, and it has a flexible neck that allows you to get just the right angle. Plus, no annoying pattern modes. If you know, you know. Just for my viewers, everyone who clicks the link down below will get free toys or gift cards for free toys. Looks like the holidays came early. Enjoy! Thanks 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗏 for partnering with me on today's video. This is the history of US Native American relations. Yes, nothing like YouTube to go from vibrator ad to the history of US Native American relations. I'm so sorry, I don't have a better transition for you. But before we get started, let me note that I am not an expert in Native American law or history. I'm simply a girl who likes going down Google rabbit holes and sharing what she learns with you, and then sprinkling in the legal knowledge I do have where appropriate. Please do not turn to YouTubers for academic expertise. You will always be disappointed. But if you're like me and you just want the basics presented in a way that isn't overtly biased in favor of the US government, and presented in a way that is at least marginally more entertaining than a high school history textbook, then you're in the right place. Also, there are 574 ethnically, culturally, and linguistically diverse, federally recognized Native American tribes in the United States. They are distinct political entities with whom the United States, at least in theory, operates on government-to-government relationship basis, meaning these nations have their own national sovereignty, constitutions, leaders, and laws. There are 326 separate federally recognized reservations, including 56 million acres of land, and ranging from the largest, the Navajo Nation Reservation, which covers 16 million acres across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, as well as the smallest, 1.32 acres, encompassing the Pit River Tribe's cemetery. There are also numerous tribes without reservations, and tribes that have never received official recognition from the federal or state government. Native American people are not a monolith in any sense of the term. Please keep that in mind as we discuss this history and these governmental relationships, because it is incredibly more complex than a single YouTube video could sum up, and has been oversimplified by histories written largely by white dudes. Okay, great. Hundreds of years before settlers arrived on the shores of North America, Native American tribes had formed governments, unions, and alliances, including the League of Five Nations, who had a constitution that governed intertribal relations that was formed in the 1100s. By the time the first settlers arrived on North American soil, this oral constitution and intertribal union was older than the United States is today. Benjamin Franklin took the League of Five Nations constitution as inspiration for his recommendations for the union of the new colonies, modeling his Albany Plan on the Iroquois Confederacy. The Albany Plan was never implemented, but it was the first plan to conceive of the colonies as a collective whole, united under one central government. After the Continental Congress was established, it created a Committee on Indian Affairs, which Benjamin Franklin spearheaded. The colonies operated under the so-called Doctrine of Discovery, which they believed gave them authority to acquire native lands, while also signing treaties recognizing the sovereignty of tribal nations. Notably, colonial governments treated tribal nations as separate and sovereign entities, setting a precedent for future relations. During the Revolutionary War, many Native American tribes found common cause with the British, probably seeing them as a lesser evil compared to the land-hungry colonial settlers. But the subsequent Treaty of Paris, which concluded the war, made no mention of these Native allies, and this glaring omission gave the fledgling United States carte blanche in dealing with Native lands, whether through treaties or by force. While Native resistance did temporarily halt the settlers' advances, the American settlers' pressure and appetite for new territories were insatiable. To address this, the United States Congress aggressively pursued treaties with Native Americans, with the dual aims of safeguarding settlers and cementing claims to tribal lands. A notable faction of these treaties never saw ratification from the Senate, leaving them unenforceable by the U.S. government. This discrepancy created a climate of distrust and unresolved issues between colonists and Native Americans. As settlers continued to encroach upon native lands, Congress found itself either unwilling or unable to deter these illegal settlements or enforce the treaties that it had ratified. The U.S. Constitution, which was ratified in 1789, provided the legal framework for relations with Native American tribes in the new United States. In Article 1, Section 8, Congress was granted the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. From 1778 to 1871, over 370 treaties were signed between the U.S. federal government and various tribal nations. Legally, these treaties held the same stature as those with foreign nations, superseding any conflicting state laws. Far from mere land agreements, these treaties acknowledged a range of rights. Provisions commonly included peace guarantees, land boundary definitions, hunting and fishing rights, and commitments to healthcare, education, housing, economic development, and agricultural assistance. The treaties didn't have an expiration date, and the U.S. government has never adequately funded their provisions, if they stuck to them at all. There isn't even an official list of all the treaties. It doesn't exist. As the United States entered the 1800s, a new nation with a ballooning population, the fertile farmland of what would become Alabama and Mississippi were especially enticing, and the Native American presence on those lands was seen as a major barrier to the God-given right of westward expansion. This also included fertile land between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. So they saw Native American refusal to leave their homelands as justification for military aggression. This aggression and resistance was exemplified by the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811, which you probably vaguely learned about in middle school history class once. Future President William Henry Harrison led an army to Tippecanoe in what is now northern Indiana. He was worried that resistance from Tecumseh, a Shawnee man who was attempting to build a confederation of Native American tribes to reject U.S. expansion, would get in the way of Indiana's statehood. So when a conversation with Tecumseh didn't solve the problems, Harrison waited until Tecumseh was traveling to attack the Shawnee. Harrison's forces won, forcing the Shawnee and other tribes in the area to flee north into Canada. Harrison was hailed as a war hero. In 1812, President James Madison signed a declaration of war against Britain, starting the War of 1812 against British, French, and Native Americans over independence and territory expansion. In 1814, Major General Andrew Jackson, soon to be President Andrew Jackson's forces, clashed with Creek Indians at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Jackson's forces won, resulting in a significant loss in lives and territory for the Creek tribe. Jackson forcibly imposed a treaty requiring the Creek to relinquish 20 million acres of land, approximately half of what is today Alabama and a significant portion of Georgia. The Treaty of Ghent, which ended the War of 1812, provided for peace and restoration of rights and possessions to Britain's Native American allies. But like with many of the treaties before, the U.S. didn't really stick to the plan, and the relentless quest for territorial expansion won out in the end. One major theme in all of U.S. Native American relations is that the U.S. government has never really known what to do about Native Americans. Two cases in the early 1800s exemplify this general confusion. In Cherokee Nation v. Georgia in 1828, the Supreme Court declined to make a ruling on the Cherokee Nation's attempt to prevent the state of Georgia from taking their land, saying it was the purview of the state of Georgia to handle it, not the Supreme Court's business. Then, a few years later, in Worcester v. Georgia, the court designated the Cherokee Nation a separate, sovereign political entity, and as such, states like Georgia couldn't regulate them. Only the federal government had the right to regulate relations with separate sovereign entities. And this confusion would persist for literal centuries. The Removal Act of 1830, pushed for by then-President Andrew Jackson, granted him the authority to negotiate removal and resettlement of several major Native American tribes. While the act portrayed removal and resettlement as voluntary, in reality it led to a series of forcible evictions. Under the Removal Act of 1830, Jackson's administration crafted a systematic approach to Indian removal. It offered tribes land west of the Mississippi River in exchange for their existing territories, with the added bonus of financial and material aid for relocation and the guarantee of protection in perpetuity from the U.S. government. This legislative provision enabled Jackson and his administration to employ a mix of persuasion, intimidation, and bribery to coerce tribes into signing removal treaties. Some tribes decided that military confrontations would be unsuccessful and adopted strategies of appeasement, hoping to retain a portion of their land by ceding significant parts of it. Some tribes resisted. The Seminole tribe in Florida is an example of this resistance, which led to the Second and Third Seminole Wars and ultimately the forced relocation of the remaining Seminole people. In 1838, the Georgia State Militia forcibly removed the Cherokee into the arid plains beyond the Mississippi River, and the violent, inhospitable conditions on this journey claimed the lives of 3,000 to 4,000 Cherokee. It's known as the Trail of Tears. By the 1840s, just 10 years after the passage of the Removal Act of 1830, the American South was virtually devoid of its native inhabitants. The U.S. government's cocktail of manipulated treaties, overt treaty violations, and judicial overreach cleared the path for westward expansion and territorial incorporation. And the motives behind these removal policies were both economic and racial. The booming cotton industry triggered an insatiable demand for land in the southern Black Belt, while some native tribes made significant strides towards assimilation, adopting aspects of Anglo-American civilization. Such endeavors did little to change the pervasive mindset of white Southerners who largely remained unwilling to see them as equals. By the culmination of Jackson's presidency, he had ratified almost 70 removal treaties, leading to the displacement of nearly 50,000 Eastern Native Americans. While the overarching plan was to shift them to the so-called Indian Territory west of the Mississippi River, in practice they were often restricted to what would later become Eastern Oklahoma. Another notable treaty is the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868. Under that treaty, the United States pledged, among other things, that the Great Sioux Reservation, including the Black Hills in present-day South Dakota, would be set apart for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Lakota Nation. Then, a few years later, gold was discovered in the Black Hills, and the United States was like, shit, give it back! And they tried to buy back the Black Hills. The Lakota rejected the offer, resulting in the Black Hills War from 1876 to 1877, which included Custer's last stand at the Battle of Little Bighorn on June 25, 1876. In 1877, Congress was like, fuck the treaty, and passed an act reclaiming the Black Hills. Nearly 50 years later, in 1923, the Lakota sued. 60 years after that, the Supreme Court determined that the act of Congress reclaiming the Black Hills was a governmental taking under the Fifth Amendment, and the tribe was owed just compensation plus interest starting from 1877. The tribe, however, refused to accept payment and is instead seeking return of the land. As of 2018, the amount due to the Lakota people for the taking of the Black Hills is estimated to be around $1 billion. The second half of the 19th century was primarily defined by the policy of allotment and assimilation, which aimed to disrupt communal landholding practices among Native American tribes and integrate them into the broader fabric of American society. While the roots of this policy were established in the middle of the 19th century through various treaties, many of which were forced upon tribes, it was codified by the General Allotment, or Dawes Act, of 1887. The Dawes Act provided the president the authority to convert communally held tribal lands into smaller smaller parcels for individual private ownership. Reservation lands were divided and allocated to individual Native American families, and then any surplus land not allocated to Native Americans could be sold to non-Native settlers. The results were devastating for tribal nations. Between 1887 and 1934, more than 90 million acres, equivalent to nearly 2/3 of all reservation land, were taken from tribal nations and handed over to settlers, often without any form of compensation. One of the pivotal Supreme Court decisions that exacerbated the effects of the Dawes Act was Lone Wolf v. Hitchcock in 1903. It essentially ruled that Congress had the authority to dispose of native lands without obtaining the consent of the tribes involved. This decision paved the way for further erosion of native landholdings, ultimately creating a class of about 100,000 landless Native Americans by the early 20th century. The aftermath of allotment policies led to an intricate and problematic pattern of land ownership called checkerboarding. This refers to the interspersed ownership of lands within reservations, where parcels of native-owned land exist side by side with those owned by non-natives. Checkerboarding made vast tracts of reservation land less practical for cohesive agricultural, timber, or other economic endeavors. This fragmented pattern of ownership also resulted in jurisdictional complications. Because there are non-natives interspersed within these native-owned lands, a complex legal overlap is created, necessitating coordination and cooperative agreements between tribal, state, and local officials. While the Dawes Act severely impacted native sovereignty and land ownership, it wasn't the only significant legislative decision of that era. In 1871, Congress passed legislation that effectively ended the U.S. government's practice of making treaties with tribal nations. The constitutionality of this decision is still up for debate, but its effects were clear. No further treaties with tribal nations would be ratified through Senate approval alone. And the Dawes Act also had another goal besides just allotment of lands to native and non-natives. It also aimed to increase native assimilation. It dangled the promise of U.S. citizenship to Native Americans who adopted the habits of civilized life. As stated by one philanthropist in 1886, the mission was to guide Native Americans from the night of barbarism and into the embrace of Christian civilization. This entailed a transformation. Native Americans were encouraged to assimilate to mainstream American culture, converting to Christianity, adopting English as their primary language, wearing Western attire, and living as self-sufficient, independent Americans. Central to this assimilation was the Indian boarding school. The first was located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Its founder famously believed you had to kill the Indian in him to save the man. Officials believed tribal bonds, especially familial ties, hindered assimilation. This prompted them to sever these connections, often through coercive measures. As the boarding school system expanded, Native American children were increasingly isolated, their identities forcibly erased, their native names replaced, traditional attire confiscated, languages silenced, and tribal associations dismantled. Resistance was met with punitive measures, and escape attempts were often thwarted with the assistance of state officials. The financial burden of these assimilation programs ironically fell on the Native Americans themselves. Trust fund money from the sale of their lands were used to fund up to 95% of the boarding school operations. To further save costs, many of these schools exploited child labor, justifying it as beneficial for the children. An even more insidious program was the outing system, which placed Native American children in white households to perform chores, further distancing them from their heritage. Hundreds of thousands of Native children were taken from their homes, often by force, and put into these boarding schools between 1870 and 1960. Many children were never returned to their families, and their fates have never been accounted for by the U.S. government. In the midst of the Great Depression and the New Deal era, U.S. Native American relations took a crucial turn. At the heart of this shift was the Indian Reorganization Act, or IRA, of 1934. The IRA halted further land sales and effectively ended allotment. It aimed to restore tribal lands to their rightful owners. The act also sought to help tribal nations reform their governments, encouraging them to embrace their inherent right to self-governance. Moreover, through the IRA, the federal government and tribal nations were empowered to place additional lands into trust to conserve and develop these resources, thereby stimulating tribal economic growth. Since 1934, the Department of the Interior has taken nearly 9 million acres back into trust as a measure to redress the grievous loss of land experienced by the tribes, though a reminder, the tribes lost around 90 million acres. A pivotal figure during this reorganization was John Collier. Appointed Commissioner for Indian Affairs in 1933, he ardently believed in the virtues of Native American community life and their profound respect for the environment. He wanted Native American reservations to stand as permanent, sovereign homelands, and the IRA was the instrument to achieve that. Through his efforts, New Deal funds were channeled to revitalize Indian reservations, nurturing a renewed appreciation for Native American culture and traditions. To some historians and Native American advocates, Collier's influence and the IRA represent a golden period in U.S. Native American relations. However, the IRA was not without its critics. While the act offered the promise of restored rights and lands, many Native Americans who sought integration into mainstream American society perceived it as a regressive policy, potentially condemning them to be living museum exhibits. Of the 252 Native American tribes who were consulted about the IRA, 78 rejected it. Moreover, while the IRA successfully curtailed the further erosion of tribal lands, its achievements were marred by economic challenges. The budgetary constraints faced by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, hindered the development of reservations and impeded the provision of essential services like education and healthcare. There was also the argument that the IRA, by emphasizing communal ownership, inadvertently curtailed individual property rights of Native Americans, making it difficult for them to secure private loans or optimize their privately held land resources. This, some argue, created barriers to economic progress, suggesting that what many Native Americans sought was integration into the broader U.S. economy rather than confinement to the economically struggling reservations. A significant legal doctrine emerged during this period, known as the Federal Indian Trust Responsibility. As articulated in the Seminole Nation v. United States decision in 1942, this doctrine enshrined the U.S.'s moral and legal obligations towards the tribes. It mandated the U.S. to safeguard tribal lands, assets, and resources, and to uphold treaty rights, underscoring the deep-seated responsibility that the federal government owed to tribal nations, as well as the paternalistic way the U.S. government viewed Native American tribes. They were described as both sovereign entities and as wards of the state in need of protection. This legal standing exemplifies the centuries of confusion in U.S. Native American relations. No other entity has this same type of relationship to the United States government. In the years following the conclusion of World War II, the U.S. government adopted policies that sought not only to redefine but to extinguish the legal and cultural status of Native American tribes. This period, stretching from 1945 to 1968, has become infamously known as the Termination era. The war itself had drastically impacted U.S. Native American relations. In an attempt to focus federal resources on war-related activities, the Bureau of Indian Affairs office was relocated from Washington to Chicago in 1942. The war also led to a loss of over 1 million acres of reservation land, of which 400,000 acres were commandeered for a gunnery range, while other portions were used for Japanese internment camps. The post-war policies sought to assimilate and dissolve tribal identities. The policies of John Collier, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, became subjects of suspicion and were criticized as a domestic form of socialism or communism. Collier's initiatives were perceived as perpetuating the wardship status of Native Americans, a costly and unnecessary bureaucracy in the eyes of many conservative congressmen. By January 1945, facing mounting opposition, Collier resigned. Policymakers increasingly viewed it as time to end the wardship status of Native Americans and dissolve federal responsibility, abolish the BIA, fragment the reservations, and liquidate Indian resources. They envisioned a future where Native Americans, stripped of their tribal status, would become individuals solely responsible for their destinies and fully assimilated into U.S. life. In 1946, an initial move towards termination was made when Congress established the Indian Claims Commission. While the commission intended to address long-standing grievances by allowing Native people to submit claims and receive compensation for stolen lands, it made clear that that land would not be returned, only compensated for. For many, this was the first step towards ending federal involvement with Native American affairs. We paid you off, now we owe you nothing. And of course, this wasn't the only aim of the policy. There were vested interests in gaining access to valuable Native lands and resources. And the National Congress of American Indians found itself in a bit of a quandary. On one hand, it wanted to respect tribal sovereignty, but on the other, there was an internal divide with many Native Americans favoring termination, primarily those who had assimilated into urban settings, because those people stood to gain materially if tribal lands were sold off. This is another example of the incredibly complex legal and social status of Native Americans. Americans, one that leads to divides not just between the US and tribal governments, but also within the Native American community. During the Civil Rights era, Native American communities mobilized, asserted their sovereignty, and demanded justice. This transformative period, known as the Self-Determination era, initiated pivotal shifts in policy, activism, and international recognition. The Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975 was a pivotal legislative moment that harnessed the momentum of the civil rights movement. This act restored a measure of sovereignty to tribal governments, allowing them some independence to handle federal funds and manage federal programs. The era was characterized not just by policy shifts, but by powerful acts of protest and activism. In 1968, the Indian Civil Rights Act, a monumental legislation that granted Native American tribes many of the privileges enumerated in the Bill of Rights, was signed into law. That same year, here in Minneapolis, the American Indian Movement, or AIM, was founded as a grassroots organization to demonstrate and bring the inequalities of Native Americans to light. In 1970, on Thanksgiving Day, AIM members seized a replica of the Mayflower in Boston Harbor, declaring the holiday a national day of mourning. In 1971, a group of Native Americans led by AIM occupied Mount Rushmore to demand the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie be honored. 20 Native Americans were eventually arrested. In October 1972, hundreds of Native Americans drove in caravans beginning at the West Coast to the offices of the Department of the Interior in Washington, D.C. in a movement called the Trail of Broken Treaties. During the occupation, AIM released the 20 Points, a list of demands that included the re-recognition of Native tribes, abolition of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and federal protections for indigenous cultures and religions. These demonstrations and other organizing in the Native American community led to the passage of a number of acts, including the Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978, which granted Native Americans the right to use certain lands and controlled substances for religious ceremonies, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990, which mandated the return of cultural items to their rightful Native American communities, and the federally recognized Indian Tribe List Act of 1994, which created 3 pathways through which indigenous groups could gain federal recognition: congressional action, U.S. court decisions, or administrative processes. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007, later supported by the U.S. in 2010, was a step in recognizing and asserting indigenous rights on a global stage. The declaration solidified the right to self-determination, empowering indigenous communities to decide their own political, economic, and cultural trajectories. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights highlighted in 2018 that despite the federal government's unique trust responsibility, Native Americans and Alaska Natives continue to grapple with disparities in health, education, and employment. Several federal agencies, such as the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Education, and the Indian Health Services, are entrusted with the responsibility of delivering essential services. However, their efforts often fall short. For example, underfunding and recent cases of provider misconduct have cast doubt over the Indian Health Service's capability to protect its patients. Similarly, despite legal requirements to log individualized education plan services, 40% of these services are either not provided or not logged through the Bureau of Indian Education. Access to basic amenities like broadband internet remains another significant concern. 18% of people on tribal lands can't access broadband, compared to 4% in non-tribal areas. Cases of missing or murdered Indigenous women lack comprehensive data, which makes it nearly impossible to solve crimes or track the extent of the problem. Economic indicators such as homeownership and access to loans reveal another layer of disparity. The demand for homeownership is high, but avenues like the Native American Direct Loan Program by the Department of Veterans Affairs have had limited impact. The median income for Native American households stands at $40,000, significantly lower than the national median of $57,000. A staggering 26% of Native people lived in poverty in 2017, compared to 14.6% nationally. In the 1831 case of Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, Chief Justice John Marshall referred to Native tribes as domestic dependent nations. Neither fully sovereign foreign nations nor merely marginalized ethnic minorities. Instead, they exist in a sort of legal limbo. Marshall compared the relationship between Native American tribes and the U.S. to that of a guardian and ward relationship. While this paternalistic stance has been criticized, it underscored a critical dual role for the federal government: a protector and nurturer on one hand, and an entity guiding Native Americans towards assimilation on the other. Native tribes have always held an anomalous position, maintaining certain powers over their internal and social relations, but also being subjected subjected to the overarching laws of the land. Their existence and rights both fit and defy conventional legal categories. And this has been a recurring theme throughout our history. The idea of Native American sovereignty, or the lack thereof, is not just about legal technicalities. It's about how the U.S. perceives and integrates, or fails to integrate, the indigenous people within its legal and territorial narratives. The language used in various judgments seems to mark Native Americans as exceptions, perpetually outside the conventional legal categories. And this blurs the boundaries of the law of who is inside and who is outside of it. The narrative of Native people as exceptions both includes them within the ambit of U.S. law and simultaneously excludes them from the full protections and rights that it offers. Sovereignty in the context of Native American relations is elusive. It's not just a concrete set of powers, but is often characterized by what Native people lack. It's as if the entire machinery of U.S. law is unable to adequately situate or understand Native people. They exist in this uncomfortable in-between, integral to the narrative of the nation, but uncomfortably distinct from its established legal structures. There are a number of reforms that those in various Native movements have called for. Those include addressing violence against Indigenous women. A rising crisis of violence against American Indian and Alaskan Native women demands immediate attention. There are calls for the Department of Justice to create a comprehensive plan to analyze federal databases to track cases of missing or murdered Indigenous women. Honor treaties. Every treaty presents a promise, many of which were broken. Honoring these treaties is required by the Constitution. This includes not only acknowledging, but actively supporting Native self-determination, history, and importantly, the return of stolen lands. Upholding trust responsibilities, with many treaties guaranteeing essential services like education, healthcare, and housing, there exists a responsibility on the part of the U.S. government to ensure these guarantees are met. Institutions like the Indian Health Service need full mandatory funding to ensure that Native communities have the resources that they need. Recognize and protect traditional rights. Fishing, hunting, and harvesting rights aren't just traditional practices, they're treaty guaranteed rights. Infrastructural projects that threaten these practices or the environment in which they're performed are a violation of these rights. Go from empty consultation to meaningful collaboration. The current consultation practices are little more than bureaucratic formalities. Native communities deserve more than just being notified that things are happening. They should be active partners in decision-making processes that affect their lands and their rights. Data collection and representation. The way Native Americans are represented in data has a profound impact on research and policy. The nuances of Native American identity are poorly understood, and questions on the U.S. Census and other important data collection devices don't adequately capture the community, leading to skewed data and affecting the research and policy that data informs. Public awareness and education. What we're taught generally in schools about Native Americans, especially current relations with Native American tribes, is abysmal. More work needs to be done to integrate engaging educational materials into our school curriculum. Mainly, Native people need to be consulted and listened to at every turn to ensure that the needs of the current communities and tribes are being met. Obviously, that is not currently happening. You can help by donating to causes you care about, like the Native American Rights Fund, which provides legal assistance to Native American tribes and individuals. This video is a fundraiser for them, so it's even easier for you to give. You can read books by Native authors and buy from Native-owned businesses, and you can learn more about the tribes native to your location by going to native-land.ca or doing a Google search. I live in Minneapolis, and I learned that in 1851, the Dakota Nation signed a treaty ceding land in southern and western Minnesota to the U.S. government. They were coerced and threatened into signing the treaty, and the federal government never paid the approximately $3 million promised in the treaty. And this house where I live was built on that same land about 35 years later. These are just a few important steps that I encourage you to take. And thank you so much for watching. Share this with your friends. Have a good day. Bye-bye.